In this video, I give an outline of the history, the long history of the Western Roman Empire. A lot of people are confused when signature moments happened in the Roman Empire, what phases this went through, and what I do here is I break it down and hopefully make it easy so people can understand and remember certain times and eras of the Roman Empire. I go from its inception all the way down to it was rocked to its core. It's just sort of burnt itself out and faded away. Secondly, I'm making this video because I just covered Ancient War Series game. It's an historical game. If you're looking for a real historical game that covers all the big moments of ancient history, the Ancient War Series of the Roman Empire, that's the one. I developed, or I didn't develop, but I made my own scenario called the Pax Romana. You'll see it on the video, and it covers all the events of the Roman Empire in the West. So this is definitely a historical game, and this outline helps me compartmentalize the long history, and hopefully it helps you guys too to understand and remember its phases. And then in the next video I go into the details of each phase. So in the outline I would start with section 1. This is the city-state of Rome. So everything in this section is about the city-state of Rome. I have I have it broken down into chapters. First chapter would be the founding. The second chapter would be the Italian peninsula. I go over the terrain. And then the third chapter is the Etruscan domination. And I go over these briefly. I don't spend, great detail in them. It would take forever. But just briefly of what happened here real quick to get people to understand its different phases, and then we move on to the next section. And then in section 2, it's the Republic of Rome. And this one's going to have many different chapters and subheadings. Well, the first chapter will be the struggle of orders. Then it's the first military tasks of the Republic. And then we go over Rome's first great general, Marcus Furius Camillus, and then the Gallic invasions. Move into our first subheading of section 2. It's the Republic Wars in Italy. And then under our first subheading, the Republic Wars in Italy, we have the Latin Wars, the Samnite Wars, the Greek invasion of Italy, and the First Punic War. And then it brings us to our number 2 subheading, Republic Wars of Defense. And let me point out that this is my outline. You're not going to find an outline like this on the internet or whatever. This is my outline. It's from the 5 or 6 books I have on Rome that I get all my information from. I go to the internet maybe 5%. So this is the way I categorize the Roman Empire so I can remember it. Now under the Republic, I categorized the first subheading, Republic Wars in Italy, because these were wars that the Romans had to control the Italian peninsula and keep control of it. The second subheading here, Republic Wars of Defense, I categorized this as wars of defense because the Romans considered that the next set of wars they fought that were outside the Italian peninsula were more defensive in nature. What they were trying to do is control the surrounding regions, not conquer or take them over, but keep them from being volatile and chaotic and spilling over into the Italian politics. So they felt that if they can keep a status quo in these surrounding regions right across the Adriatic or the Mediterranean, then that would be better for them. That's why these are labeled wars of defense. And of course at the same time it kept Rome in supremacy. So these wars were the First and Second Illyrian War, the Second Punic War, and the First and Second Macedonian War. So this takes us to our third subtitle of the Republic, Republic Wars of Conquest. Now, Rome decided at this time, the reason I have it listed as this is because the wars that were continuing in the surrounding areas and competition for trade and resources were constantly causing Rome problems, or these nations would be competing with Rome for supremacy of these resources. So Rome decided, in order to keep these regions stable and under control and stop kings such as Philip V or Antiochus the Great from dominating these areas and then competing with Rome, that they would go over and do the job and therefore control the areas. And so the first chapter of this would be the Syrian War, the third and final Illyrian War, and the reason we say third and final is because Rome conquers them now. The third Macedonian War, the fourth and final Macedonian War, and then the Lusitania War. And then that moves us into subtitle number 4, the social struggles. Now with the social wars, I start at the Gracchi brothers at 133 BC, and then we have the Jugurthine War, and then Gaius Marius, who is sometimes considered the third founder of Rome, and then we go into the First Gallic War, and then the Social War of 91. And that brings us to our fifth subtitle, the Decline of the Republic. Now as we start our fifth subtitle of the Decline of the Republic, it goes from 88 to 30. It takes quite a while for it to decline. Just as Rome wasn't built in a day, the Republic didn't die in a day either. And I start this off with the Marius and Sola Civil War in 88 BC. This where really starts the Republic's decline. And we go to the first Mithridatic War, the second Mithridatic War, and then we have Gaius Pompey, which is one of the people who lead to the decline of the Republic. Then we have the third Servile War. And I know I just list Servile Wars here because there were two that happened in Sicily, but they were kind of minor. But the third one with Spartacus was sort of a big deal. Then you have the third and final Mithridatic War, and then you have pirates. Now pirates have been around forever, but they were such a menace at this point that they had to be dealt with. And then Catiline conspiracy, and that takes us right into Julius Caesar, then the first triumvirate, then the second Gallic Wars, that's Caesar's wars, then the Triumvirate Wars, that's another Roman civil war, and then the assassination of Julius Caesar, and then the Caesarian faction versus the Centaurials, because which is basically another civil war, because you had the people defending Caesar fighting the assassins. And then you had the second triumvirate that was formed, and then you have wars of the second triumvirate, which is more civil wars. And then we come to Gaius Octavian, which becomes the first Emperor Augustus in 27 BC, and that ends the Republic. This takes us to section 3, Imperial Rome. And once I get to Imperial Rome, I just go by centuries, and it's pretty easy to do that. It starts out with the Julio-Claudio dynasty. I covered Queen Boudica. I have Year of the Four Emperors, the Flavian dynasty, and the Danube Wars. And this takes us where basically I end the first century. So when I discuss this further in detail in the next video, you're going to see I categorize it pretty well so you can remember it. I forgot to mention that our ancient Roman game, the Pax Romana, that we cover very historical situations, starts with the Jugurthine War and Marius and Sola, and it continues through the Imperial Rome here. Now section 4, Imperial Rome 2nd century, I have listed, it's pretty pretty simple because we start off with the subtitle number 1, the 5 good emperors. That's how we describe the 2nd century, and this almost covers the entire 2nd century, these 5 emperors. Under these emperors we have the chapters of the Danube Wars and Parthian Wars. They stop, they start, they stop, they start, and that's what they're dealing with. We move into subtitle number 2 in the 2nd century, and we go to Septimus Severus and his army. And he takes us out of the 2nd century and into the 3rd century. So it's pretty simple in the 2nd century what we're dealing with here. Now, to finish off the 2nd century, the 2 chapters we deal with here are the Civil Wars, because he had to have a civil war, and more Parthian Wars. But our game ends with Septimus Severus. So our ancient war game goes all the way from 107 BC to 200 AC. So it's a great historical game. And anyways, it moves us into section 5. So as we start the 5th section, Imperial Rome 3rd century, we start off with Baric emperors. From 235 to 284, we basically had these Baric emperors, so called because when an emperor was killed or assassinated, the legions would just promote their commander to be the next emperor, and then they would fight. And every one of these Baric emperors, there was like 20 of them in this span, all died a violent death, except maybe one. And then the next chapter is Lucius, Domitius, Aurelius, and he becomes like the savior of Rome because he puts it back on a stable footing. Then you have the Palmyrene Wars, and then we have military reorganization, which is done by Emperor Domitian when he comes to power. This brings us to our next section, section 6, the 4th century of Imperial Rome, and we start with yet another Parthian War. And then we get into Constantine the Great and some more Roman civil wars, because he has to fight to unite the empire. Then we have yet another Parthian War, and then I start with the next chapter about the barbarians are starting to frequently overrun the borders. So I call it barbarians knocking. And that takes us to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And in our last section, section 7, fall of the Western Roman Empire, I start that at 378 BC, and I count the fall myself at 476, because some people may have some different dates. And then in these chapters, it's Adrianople, the barbarians at the door, and Attila the Hun. And that is the outline of the history of the Western Roman Empire. In the next video, I go into detail of each chapter and each section.